for free. Okay, so this is gonna be a rather long video, so here is a brief synopsis. Here's a too long didn't watch. If you ever hear the Girl from Ipanema, this background music, performed in the key of F instead of the key of D flat, you're hearing a relic of American cultural hegemony, codified by decisions made at the Berklee College of Music in the 1970s. Yeah, this song is far weirder than you ever thought.
Olha que coisa mais linda, mais cheia de graça. Ela, menina, que vem que passa, num doce balanço, caminho do mar.
Garota de Ipanema, The Girl from Ipanema, is the second most recorded song in human history. It represented Brazil in the 2016 Olympics, both in the opening ceremonies and in its official mascots, Vinicius and Tom, after the song's composers. But for a tune so internationally popular and so representative of Brazilian pride, it is actually a rather strange song. The harmony on the bridge is nothing less than haunting.
Por que estou tão sozinho?
It's a chord progression that's notoriously difficult to understand using traditional analysis, which makes it all the more strange how the song is used in popular culture. It's auditory shorthand for light, frivolous background music. Like in V for Vendetta, V is humming along to the Girl from Ipanema in light dulcet tones in the breakfast scene, which is meant to set up a kind of mood whiplash with the action of the rest of the movie. Taken at face value, the song written by Vinicius Moraes and Tom Jobim is a light trifle about ogling women on the Ipanema beach. But this kind of kitsch reputation that surrounds the song has, I don't know, always rubbed me the wrong way. And it's not just because the music itself is actually fairly involved if you look at the harmony and the melody. No, it actually goes a little bit deeper than that. And to explain what I mean, we need to first talk about the history of Bossa Nova.
Parte Bossa Nova.
É pau, é pedra, é o fim do caminho. É resto de toco, é pouco sozinho.
Bossa Nova, or the new wave, or new flair, or new style, sometimes translations aren't very good, it's Bossa Nova, whatever. Bossa Nova comes from the nightclubs of Rio de Janeiro of the 1950s and 1960s. It's one of the many descendants of samba, that uniquely Afro-Brazilian syncopated musical and dance form that has dominated Brazilian culture for the past 100 years. Bossa Nova and samba were featured very prevalently in the film Orfeo Negro, or Black Orpheus. Based on a play by Vinicius Moraes, who wrote the lyrics to Girl from Ipanema, Orfeo Negro tells the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, set in a favela during Carnival in Rio de Janeiro. The movie became an international success, winning the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival in 1959. And thrust Brazilian culture and music into the international spotlight. Aside from samba, Bossa Nova also has its roots in choro, an earlier instrumental style also from Rio de Janeiro. Choro features acoustic guitars playing syncopated bass lines along with chordal accompaniment. Often these guitarists play these bass lines on 7-string guitars. Check out how Anat Cohen's band does it. Brazilian 7-string guitarists putting bassists out of work long before metal musicians ever did. Maximum Gent. The height of Bossa Nova's popularity on the international stage came with 1964's Gets Gilberto, a collaboration between Brazilian guitarist Gilberto and American saxophonist Stan Getz, which featured The Girl from Ipanema. Part of the international success, no doubt, was the inclusion of an English verse sung by Gilberto's wife Astrid, who apparently was the only person who could sing in English at the recording session. Gilberto had developed a unique way of playing the guitar that he called violão gago, or the stuttering guitar by mimicking specific elements of samba percussion with his thumb and other fingers. One of the reasons why the American saxophonist Stan Getz fits so well within this violão gago bossa nova aesthetic is because Brazilian composers of the time had been borrowing harmonic concepts from American jazz. Jerry Mulligan's arrangements on Miles Davis's Birth of the Cool were instrumental in creating the cool jazz sound in North America, and apparently also deeply influenced Tom Jobim. But American influence also came in how the songs were arranged. The Girl From Ipanema uses an AABA song form, which was very popular in North American musical theater, as well as earlier Tin Pan Alley songwriting from composers like Cole Porter and Irving Berlin. The Girl From Ipanema also has a cheeky verse, or a free-flowing introduction that sets up the song.
Que bom se nós cantássemos os três.
This kind of thing was very popular in musical theater in North America, but was not seen that frequently in Brazil. All of these American influences on Brazilian songwriting of the era, specifically bossa nova, was seen in some circles as a whitewashing of samba, a diminution and commodification of the rich Afro-Brazilian syncopated style to appeal to the sensibilities of upper-class and middle-class whites.
Tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema.
Beyond the class and racial distinction, the influence of American jazz music and musical theater music was seen as American cultural imperialism, and so bossa nova was treated with suspicion. This cultural friction between Brazilian identity and the international success of bossa nova music continues in interesting ways to this day. For example, the key in which you play The Girl From Ipanema actually matters. So there's like a 90% chance that whenever you hear The Girl From Ipanema played live by a live band at like a cocktail hour or something like that, they'll be playing it in the key of F. That's the key of the published sheet music, as well as the key that Frank Sinatra sang it in.
Girl from Ipanema goes a-walking
And because of that, it kind of has become the default among American jazz musicians for The Girl From Ipanema. This is Stevie Wonder performing The Girl From Ipanema in F in Springfield, Massachusetts. There's a problem with that, though. You see, the version of The Girl From Ipanema that's on Gets Gilberto, the recording that made bossa nova famous, is actually in the key of D flat. And so because of that, D flat is seen as the more authentic Brazilian key. So when Stevie Wonder performs The Girl From Ipanema in Brazil, you better believe that he's playing it in D flat. There's a certain prestige in this case to the key of D flat, because it helps quell any questions of authenticity that might arise around encroaching American influence on Brazilian culture and bossa nova. If you play it in the key of D flat, you are a real authentic musician. If you play it in the key of F, you are a fake American musician. That said, for this video, we're going to be analyzing it in the key of F, mainly because it's just a lot easier, there are a lot less flats, but also because that's the key that I learned it in. So, anyway, let's first check out the melody.
Parte 2. Melodia.
The melody of The Girl From Ipanema today will be sung by Martina da Silva, so thank you, Martina. The A section melody is based on a simple, repeated melodic cell. So we'll start on the note G, descend down a third to E, and then descend down a step to D, and then repeat that pattern in this syncopated, lilting kind of melody.
Olha que coisa mais linda, mais cheia de graça, ela menina que vem.
That pattern of a third down and then a step down is repeated in measures 5 and 6, except now it's transposed down a step in the key of F. So now it's F, D, and C. That little melodic pattern is transposed again. So we finish out the phrase with an E, down a third to a C, down a step to a B flat, and then finally resolving to a C. This idea of taking the same pattern but then moving it around in the key is called a tonal sequence. Sequences are a very powerful tool for developing musical ideas. They're why the word Gloria has so many syllables. You also probably know this little number. A very cool thing about the Girl from Ipanema is that it's built entirely from sequences. Every bit of the melody is either a repetition of something that came before, or is itself the start of a new sequence, which is useful because repetition legitimizes, repetition legitimizes, repetition After the A section repeats, okay, good, we get to the B section, which starts a new sequence. It's clear that we aren't in the key of F anymore because there are a lot of flats on the sheet music. So what key are we in? Well, we can actually tell just by using our ears. If I played you the melody unaccompanied without any harmony, you can pretty clearly hear that the first 4 measures of the bridge are in the key of D flat. Check it out.
Ah, porque estou tão sozinho.
That's the chord that the melody wants to resolve to, or at least it wants to resolve to if we're following European standards of tonality, which we aren't. The next thing that happens is that exact phrase gets transposed up a minor third. Every interval is transposed up to the key of E major. This is called a real sequence, to differentiate it, I guess, from all of those fake sequences.
Ah, porque tudo é tão triste.
Wow. Sounds so real. We get another iteration of the sequence again, now up a minor second to the key of F, where we started.
Ah, beleza que existe.
Sequences are like comedy. They generally follow a rule of 3. You need to give somebody the same melody enough times so they get the point, but not repeat it too much so you're just beating a dead horse. The lyrics in the A section of the Girl from Ipanema, when we're in the key of F, talk of the beauty and grace of this girl from Ipanema. This rapidly changes in the B section, where we start modulating, where the lyrics become much more introspective and are all about how the narrator is a lonely little sad boy. In the tradition of Tin Pan Alley American musical theater songwriting, tunes in AABA form generally will change keys on the bridge, the B section. By cycling through different keys, we're taken on a journey. We have the feeling of traveling. We have a new emotional perspective on the music that we've been listening to. The keys that we travel to, D flat, E, and F, are distantly related. They don't have any notes in common between all of them, but because we have a simple sequence of a clear musical idea, we don't mind. Repetition legitimizes, repetition legitimizes, repetition legitimizes. The second half of the bridge, which is 16 bars long, by the way. It's a very long bridge, but anyway, I digress, I digress, I digress. The second half gives us our final sequence. We have an octave leap down from C, and then a scalar run up to a G sharp resolving to A, and then that whole pattern repeats again down a step.
A beleza que não é só minha, que também passa sozinha.
So the tune, the melody to the Girl from Ipanema, is just 3 finely crafted sequences. 3 sequences, and then we get the haunting, lilting melody of the Girl from Ipanema. So why am I saying that it's so weird? Because this technique has been used since Bach, and honestly, the song so far sounds like it's something that could have been written out of American Tin Pan Alley. Well,
Ah, porque estou tão sozinho.
Parte 3. Countermelodia.
the bridge to the Girl from Ipanema features a prominent countermelody in the piano. You can hear it on the famous Gilberto recording. That line, even though it sounds kind of like the pianist was noodling a little bit, shows up in many recordings from that era. You can hear it in later Frank Sinatra recordings in the schmaltzy, dramatic orchestration of unison strings. Whenever João Gilberto and Tom Jobim perform together, you'll hear that background line. And you can also hear it in early vocal arrangements, like this one from the Brazilian vocal group Os Cariocas. The countermelody consists of 2 short phrases in the bridge built from the blues scale of the key in which they're played. So for the first 4 measures, where we're in the key of D flat, we're playing a D flat blues scale, starting on the 5th. The next 4 measures of the bridge in the key of E have a slightly different phrase using an E blues scale.
Porque estou tão sozinho. Ah, porque tudo é tão triste.
The important point of this counterpoint is that the blues scale was not used very frequently in Brazilian music prior to Bossa Nova. But musicians working in nightclubs in Rio de Janeiro in the 1950s, immediately before the explosion of Bossa Nova, very freely borrowed blues vocabulary from African Americans. Brian McCann points this out in his essay, Blues and Samba, Another Side of Bossa Nova History. Bossa Nova has often been derided as the whitening of samba, a samba for cocktail-sipping sophisticates. But the Brazilian jazz musicians of the late 1950s knew that by incorporating greater blues influence into their playing, they were tapping into the headwaters of African American music. You can definitely hear that blues influence on the tune Maria Moita by Sergio Mendes, reminiscent of some R&B sax playing of the time. McCann suggests that part of the reason why American musicians so enthusiastically embraced Bossa Nova was because of this blues influence. You can hear it on Horace Silver's Cape Verdean Blues. The Girl from Ipanema's subtle blues countermelody has been largely erased from the collective musical consciousness of jazz musicians performing today. And the reason for that is because of this stupid thing, the Real Book. The Real Book is a collection of jazz standards put together at the Berklee College of Music in the 1970s. These were transcriptions of recordings that were done by students that later became codified as a sort of jazz canon. The transcription that was done for the Real Book of The Girl from Ipanema did not include the blues countermelody. And so, since the publication of the Real Book, that melody has rarely been performed. Not having that counter melody in there is an unfortunate side effect of the popularity of jazz education and the Real Book. Young musicians learn music from the Real Book, not the recordings, and now we have 50 years of Girl from Ipanema adaptations, the second most recorded song in human history, whitewashed of their blues roots.
And this is purely because the kid at Berklee that transcribed The Girl from Ipanema didn't think that the counter melody was worth writing down, and so they didn't. Maybe they didn't know the history of its inclusion in all of those recordings. I don't know. So the result is The Girl from Ipanema has become kind of a Xerox of a Xerox. Like the music has been JPEG'd one too many times, which plays into the original critique of Bossa Nova as a watering down of Brazilian culture. I honestly think that this has something to do with the public understanding of The Girl from Ipanema as being a piece of kitsch, a trifle. And I think that's unfortunate because the song, to me, is very beautiful. And I think a big part of that beauty stems from the song's harmony. Parte 4. Armonia.
The Girl from Ipanema's A section uses roughly the same harmonic progression as Duke Ellington's Take the A Train, which is a chord progression that Tom Jobim apparently really liked, because he also included it in the A section for his tune So Danço Samba. The Take the A Train progression sounds like this. We start on an F major 7, the 1 major 7, the tonic, home bass. We then go to a G7, a secondary dominant, the 5 of 5. We're now developing the harmony. We then go to a G minor 7, the 2 minor 7 chord, and then a C7, the 5/7 chord, and finally come back home to F major 7, the 1 major 7. Problem is, those aren't the chords to The Girl from Ipanema. They might be written in the Real Book, but the actual chords as they're performed by Gilberto and Tom Jobim are a little bit more subtle and a little bit more ambiguous. Transposed to the key of F, the first chord that Gilberto plays is not an F major 7, but rather an F6 over C without the F. The bass player ends up playing the root of the chord, the F, but Gilberto only plays 3 notes and he isn't playing the F anywhere. Kind of weird. That's the same for the next chord in the progression, G7 over D without the G. Very strange. The next chord is a G minor 7 over D without the G, followed by a D flat diminished chord substituting for C7. It's like a C7 chord, but instead of C, there's a D flat in there. That then resolves to F6 over C. All of these chords are like ambiguous reharmonizations of the original chord progression without actually changing the chords at all. It's very cool. Check it out.
Moça do corpo dourado do sol de Ipanema, o seu balançado é mais que poema, é a coisa mais linda que eu já vi passar.
There's a sneaky little turnaround that's then included at the end of the A section in some arrangements, which goes A minor 7, A flat 7, D flat major 7, G flat major 7. Frank Sinatra occasionally used this arrangement.
Goes,
Jobim himself was a little hesitant to actually play this turnaround. He purposely does not play the turnaround when it happens in the orchestration.
Each one she passes goes, ah.
But later on in his career, he ended up liking it enough to start playing it. We then come to the infamous bridge, which uses a fairly ambiguous harmonic scheme. There's a whole cottage industry of YouTube videos and articles out there trying to make sense of what the bridge is actually all about, which is kind of strange to me. Because remember, this is the second most recorded song in human history, and the bridge remains a bit of a mystery to people. This is because, and I'm simplifying a little bit here, improvisers need to know what key a chord is in order to improvise around that chord progression. So say I have a G7 chord in the key of F. Knowing that it's in the key of F is very useful for me, because I can take the notes from the G7 chord and then fill in all the gaps with notes from the key of F to create a scale from which to improvise. Very nifty. But say I had a G7 and the key of C minor. Now there's a different context. There are different notes to fill in between the gaps of the chord tones, and so there's a different scale that I might use to improvise with. If you know the key that the chord is in, you will know ahead of time what notes will sound good with the chord. An important clue to figure out the key from the chords is a pattern called a 2-5. It's the sound of a minor 7th chord descending down a 5th to a dominant 7th chord. That pattern is used everywhere in American popular song from the first half of the 20th century. And because that repertoire is what jazz musicians train on, they're hardwired to be able to identify 2-5 patterns. And I literally mean hardwired. I took part in a study 2 years ago entitled Improvisation Experience Predicts How Musicians Categorize Musical Structures, where subjects listened to examples of harmony. And jazz musicians, presumably because of their experience, were found to be able to identify functional relationships like 2-5s more readily than other musicians. It's why jazz musicians everywhere can half-ass jazz standards just by looking at the iReal Pro app on their phone. But that kind of pattern recognition does not work for the chord progression that Tom Jobim wrote on the bridge of the Girl from Ipanema. Chords seem to be in keys, but they don't follow the same kinds of tidy relationships of 2-5s like they do on American jazz standards. Like, we might expect a chord we've seen a million times to function as a noun, but for whatever reason on the bridge of the Girl from Ipanema, it's functioning as a verb. We might get the general sense of what it's supposed to mean, but the grammar is really odd. Let's hear what the harmony on the bridge with the modulating keys might sound like with a typical 2-5 vocabulary, with secondary dominants setting up the new keys. This is the Girl from Ipanema in the style of Tin Pan Alley, like Cole Porter or Irving Berlin.
Ah, porque estou tão sozinho? Ah, porque tudo é tão triste?
Both American jazz and Brazilian bossa nova might use spicy chords, but the Brazilian chords are always going to be a little bit more ambiguous in function. The question, of course, becomes, how did Jobim pick the chords that he used? Well, to figure that out, we're going to pull a real pro jazz move and listen to the original commercial recording of The Girl from Ipanema from 1963, a full year before Gilberto and Stan Getz recorded their version. We're going to listen to Perry Ribeiro.
Tudo é tão triste.
Perry Ribeiro's version, which is actually in the key of G. The original is in the key of G, not D flat. Interesting. But most people don't actually know that, so G doesn't have the same kind of cultural prestige as D flat does. Anyway, so Perry Ribeiro's version doesn't really sound like bossa nova all that much. He's singing with this wide vibrato along the lines of the crooners of the era, with this rich and lush studio orchestra backing him. But the arranger that he used for this version of The Girl from Ipanema wrote some really interesting chords on the bridge, which act as this kind of missing link between the old American style and the new style, the bossa nova. Parte 5. Ponche.
We're going to check out Perry Ribeiro's version side to side with the Getz Gilberto, which seems to be the version that Tom Jobim settled on. Transposed to the same key, both versions start on a G-flat major 7. The melody tells us that we're in the key of D-flat, so this G-flat major 7 functions as a 4 major 7 chord. From there, in Perry Ribeiro's version, we have an F sharp minor 7 and harmonic G flat minor 7, the 4 minor 7 in the key of D flat, going to a B7, the flat 7/7. Jazz musicians call this 4 minor to flat 7/7 the backdoor 2/5 progression, because it wants to resolve in the back door to the 1 major 7 like this. Very nice. Gilberto, on the other hand, just goes directly from the G flat major 7 to the B7, so simplifying the progression just a little bit.
Ah, porque estou tão sozinho. Ah, porque estou tão sozinho.
Perry Ribeiro then just takes the exact same chord progression from before and transposes it up a minor third to the key of E, like the melody does. We now have an A major 7, the 4 major 7 in the key of E, going to an A minor 7, the 4 minor 7, to a D7, the flat 7/7. The same progression that we had before. Gilberto replaces the A major 7, the 4 major, with an F sharp minor 7, the 2 minor. 2s and 4 chords both have subdominant functions within keys, so they're substitutes for one another. But by substituting chords, you're breaking the nice symmetry of having the same chord progression on each line of the bridge. You're making the chord progression more ambiguous and hard to figure out. Gilberto then doesn't end up playing the A minor 7, that 4 minor 7. Instead, he just goes directly to the D7 chord.
Ah, porque tudo é tão triste. Ah, porque tudo é tão triste.
Moving on to the third line, Ribeiro repeats the chords in the exact same order, just up a half step. B flat major 7, the 4 major 7 in the key of F, B flat minor 7, the 4 minor 7 in the key of F, and then E flat 7, the flat 7/7. Gilberto elects to do the same trick of replacing the 4 major 7 with the 2 minor 7. But what makes this tricky is that we've been changing keys without ever hitting the 1 chord. When we were in D flat, we never had any D flat chord. When we were in E, we never had any E chord. This is what's confusing because the chord progression is giving us a different tonal logic than what the melody is. This is what makes Bossa Nova so special, I think. It's ambiguity.
Ah, beleza que existe. Ah, beleza que existe. A beleza que não é só minha, que também passa sozinha.
There we go. That's the bridge. I applaud you for making it this far. Thank you for sticking around, everybody. It's time to put the song in some much-needed context.
Parcesies, contesto.
This kind of chord progression and melodic analysis might come as a bit of a surprise to my fellow jazz musicians because this is not the way that I was taught the bridge to the Girl from Ipanema. I think by looking at 3 versions of the bridge, a hypothetical Tin Pan Alley American style of harmonizing the bridge, a missing link version of the harmony that was provided by Perry Ribeiro, and finally the version that we got, the ambiguous Gilberto harmonization, we have a clearer picture. We have harmony that was constructed and then deconstructed. We have the American jazz, and then we have the Brazilian bossa nova. The composer and conductor Leonard Bernstein gave a series of lectures at Harvard University in 1973 that he called The Unanswered Question. He used these lectures to explore a universal grammar for musical language. It's debatable on whether or not he succeeded, but one point that I think is relevant is his point on the importance of deletion in poetry and in music. His example was Shakespeare's phrase, "Juliet is the sun."
Juliet is the sun, a famous classic example of this is that.
It's beautiful. And it's also totally illogical because Juliet is not, in fact, the sun.
Juliet is a human organism. The sun is a star. How do they get to be equal?
You could construct a wordier and more logical sentence like, Juliet is beautiful and radiant, and the sun, a star, is also beautiful and radiant, so Juliet is like the sun in terms of their shared radiance. Logical, but dumb. Even if you reduce that to something less wordy, like, Juliet is radiant like the sun, it might be beautiful, but it's not quite as poetic as Juliet is the sun. Things tend to become more beautiful when you remove what is not necessary for their beauty, even if it's not logical. just like the harmony for the Girl from Ipanema. My thought is that the harmony for the Girl from Ipanema could have been very different. It could have been more logical, but less beautiful. But through the process of deletion and reharmonization, Gilberto's chords become much more poetic. This harmonic poetry is at the core of Brazilian bossa nova, and it is the thing, in my opinion, that distinguishes it from American jazz harmony, even though it comes from very similar roots. So in researching this video, I found a really interesting historical document. I found a recording of the very first time the Girl from Ipanema was ever performed live in public. In late August of 1962, there was a show at the Au Bon Gourmet nightclub in Copacabana, Rio de Janeiro, where Tom Jobim, Gilberto, and Vinicius de Moraes all sang The Girl from Ipanema for the very first time in front of a live audience. And there's some fascinating things that we can learn from this recording. The countermelody is there, as well as Gilberto's deconstructed chords on the bridge, but there's also some really interesting stuff there that just never made it into any future recordings. And I thought it'd be fun to listen to this recording and give my commentary on it as we listen to it. Of course, I can't really do that in this video because I can only play 5 to 7 seconds of commercial recordings because of YouTube and Content ID. Yes, this recording is owned by Universal Music Group, but there is a place that you can hear it with my commentary, and that is on the extended version of this video that was uploaded exclusively to Nebula, the creator-owned streaming service that I joined specifically so I could talk about commercial recordings more without having to worry about getting blocked and demonetized the way that music education should be. Nebula features many of YouTube's favorite educational channels like Up and Atom, Thomas Frank, Legal Eagle, Knowing Better, 12-Tone, and many, many more. It's a great place to watch and discover really great content ad-free, as well as support your favorite creators. I hope you enjoyed this, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys understand with my interest in the subject matter because, you know, there's a really deep history there, and it's a great way of talking about, you know, Brazilian music and bossa nova music. And you know, unless we constantly are thinking about the deeper history of the media in which we engage, we'll end up with the real book version of music and the real book version of history. And I don't think that's a good idea.